One of the absolute most magical aspects of filmmaking is the fact that so many people, so many artists have to come together to collaborate in order to create this single wonderful piece of art. Hi, I'm Robert Christopher Smith, and this is the Lethal Voice Podcast, where I deliver deep dives on all my productions, letting you take a look behind the scenes at each and every dumb decision I made, as well as each small victory along the way. This first season is called Turning to Vengeance, and it's focused on everything that I went through over about a 5-year period to bring Vengeance Turns from the page to screens all around the world. We are now in Chapter 3, Lockdown Productions. And tonight is an extra special, extra dramatic, and extra long episode titled 48-Hour Telethon and the First Day. This episode, like the next few, reflects my own personal recollections and opinions from the time that we made the movie. Others may remember things differently, but where I state facts, they're based on emails, call sheets, and actual audio and video from the production. I'm very open to discussing all of this with those mentioned and allowing them the opportunity to share their perspectives here on the podcast as well. All of these episodes about everything that took place during production were by far the most difficult to write and the hardest stories for me to tell overall, because there were such extreme highs and lows associated with each and every person along the way. No matter what you hear about how upset I may have been at any point with anyone at any time, please understand that I really love each and every one of them, and I'm very glad to have had all of them as part of my life and as part of this journey, including Dave Ross. Another thing you'll have to keep in mind is the whole context of COVID and the stress that it added, which actually plays its own role all the way through every step of Vengeance Turns, from here until the film finds distribution. As you learned in the previous episode, in some ways, the pandemic is responsible for my ever finally being able to film my story. It was Dave Ross contacting us after the Cabin Fever radio reading of our screenplay for Vengeance Turns that ever even got any real momentum started. And COVID was a factor that influenced all of our decisions from that point on. In addition to promising us our locations, wardrobe, and some cash to shoot the film, Dave Ross suggested that we continue doing these live streams and that we would put together a crowdfunding effort to see if we could maybe raise, additional cash to add to these assets that he was already guaranteeing the production. And his goal was for this to, start shooting in just a few months. So we had gone from 0 to 100 in just a matter of days. And since we were working with so much less than we had ever figured before, doing the crowdfunding made sense to us too. And David and I really put our heart into a plan that we hoped would maximize the response to the campaign and ultimately to our production budget. And that's when we came up with the Cabin Fever 48-Hour Telethon. While we were building the telethon, we began the casting process again, which was absolutely very invigorating. During our reading of Vengeance Turns for Cabin Fever Radio, Kelsey Jaffer had finally played the role she originally auditioned for as Rebecca and Mia Falcone. But she wanted to return to the role of Delicate Poison that we had really built especially for her as we returned to the idea of filming this story finally. And while a new talent named Rob Fury had read the role of Jefferson Coltrane for Cabin Fever Radio, Jamal Gardner was the man I had written the role for, and once we were ready to film, he was excited to take it on. We immediately offered a role to Rob Fury, though, and he ended up playing a key bad guy role, a character named Bronson that Mia brutalizes in Volume 1, and it is truly a standout performance. Remember a few episodes back when I told you a little about being on HBO's Perry Mason and spending so much time in the jury box with those other actors that we all just kind of bonded and that some were going to return to this story? Well, the actor sitting next to me that whole time for Perry Mason, her name was Kate Comstock, and we both knew that if I ever did get to shoot this wild idea of Vengeance Turns that I was not shutting up about, that she would have to be in it. So she was one of the very first calls I made, and she ended up delivering an unforgettable performance as Mrs. Coppersmith, one of the local biddies. Kate even got her son to play the role of Henry Dubois in the cold open for Vengeance Turns Volume 1. Tomer David was another juror I spent a lot of time chatting with, and I actually ended up seeing him a few times on other sets after Perry Mason too. And he plays Frank Dubois, who gets slaughtered along with his family in that cold open for Volume 1. One other juror, Sean Hartman, had really been one of my closest friends while on the set for Perry Mason. And while he didn't end up playing a role in the films, we were very lucky to have him on board as our weapons master since he had experience with that. And it was a position that we really needed filled by someone that we trusted. Having become a huge fan of Mariah Hart while we shot that show CNET Route all together in Arizona a couple years earlier, we asked her to play Hester Blake, and now I cannot imagine anyone else in that role. For me, Mariah really just becomes Hester in these movies. She really put something wonderful on the screen with her Hester for us. Dave Ross knew of another young actor to play Matilda Dubois, Henry's sister, and he had another friend who could play Oscar Gomez, one of the main villains, alongside Jamal Gardner's Jefferson Coltrane and my Frank Ford. To find our new Rebecca and Mia Falcone, as well as the other cast, we went back to Backstage.com. After posting for the roles, we were blown away at the response that we received, especially due to being at the height of the pandemic. But let me tell you, getting to see so many new, talented actors reading for the roles of Rebecca, Simon, Gloria, and the rest was truly just uplifting to my spirit at a time that I really, really needed it. To fill the main role of Rebecca and Mia, we really had an abundance of talent, just amazing choices. And we really ended up feeling like each one of them had some specific quality that the others didn't have. Some really nailed the sweetness and the naive nature of Rebecca. And then others came along and brought this vicious and aggressive version of Mia that would blow us away. But there was one actor who was physically smaller than the rest and seemed very innocent and naive in her role as Rebecca that made it just seem that much more cruel when her Mia, it just stood out, this contrast between her Rebecca and her Mia that we didn't see in any of the other actors. And watching that audition, David Ruano and I knew, we looked at each other and knew we had found our lead actor with Paola Luelmo. Absolutely amazing. For Simon, we felt really lucky too. There were several actors that had really understood the character arc of moving Simon from this whipped and scared child at the beginning to being a man who was confident with himself and his whole world by the end. And one actor stood out to us in particular, so we decided that we were going to offer this guy the part. However, literally days before we were ready to shoot and minutes before we were going to make an offer to this other guy, we saw an audition from an actor who sent his in at the last minute, and his name, Azeem Vecchio. And when we watched his audition, you could feel the energy on the screen and in the room from the people that were watching it. It wasn't even a question. David and I looked at each other and said, "That's Simon." We talked with, Azeem a little bit and then scheduled a Zoom call between him and Jamal Gardner, and that went really well. And so a few weeks later, Azeem would transform into Simon almost entirely and completely for the whole time of our shoot. Maybe the biggest and most pleasant surprise came in the form of an actor named Stacy Marie Turner. She auditioned for and played the role of the other biddy in town. Her name was Mrs. Paine. And Stacy has been a part of every production I've done since then. One of the factors, other than talent, that was key with each actor that we hired was the need for their, live participation with this 48-hour telethon that we were planning. And it was going to be taking place in a matter of weeks. So we needed people who were gung-ho about that as well as, being a part of the film, being part of that crew, just becoming a part of this family. And everyone we talked to was on board with this whole adventure that we had planned. And everyone seemed really excited about my idea that our efforts shouldn't only benefit us. After the terrible experience of being jerked around for the past 3 years and not getting to make Vengeance Turns, and then feeling like I might actually die when I had COVID, but living through it and bouncing back, more than ever, I was at this point in my life where I wanted whatever I was doing to have some impact on the world at large. But that wasn't exactly a new thing. I mean, when I was a kid, the first thing I ever thought about was being a priest when I grew up. And then I had nearly gone to UK medical school out of this lifelong desire to help people. And I'm not married. I don't have kids, but I think a lot about what kind of legacy I want to leave behind. And as I shared all of this same kind of stream of consciousness with my actors for Vengeance Turns, really everyone involved with this whole thing thought that the 48-hour telethon, that the idea, it just became infectious. And all of them wanted to contribute as well. So while we tried to make money for ourselves and for this production, each of us also chose causes that we were passionate about. And we posted them on the website and we mentioned them throughout our broadcast to help publicize them, to the whole world. And then some of us even made commitments that part of our royalties, if we're ever so lucky as to make a profit with Vengeance Turns, we wanted part of that to go to helping others. Kelsey and I both felt really strongly about giving back to the Kumeyaay, who were the only local indigenous people that we refer to or discuss in the film. And although they're not villains or vilified in any way in our story, the history of exploitation and mistreatment of natives in our country is enough for me to feel indebted to them, even by just using their name. And because of the level of violence in the film, and especially that some of it is aimed directly at women and children, a few of us also felt strongly about supporting various organizations that provide shelter and assistance to victims of domestic abuse, and also things like keeping guns off the street. For me, my personal royalties for being the director of the films will all be directed into these causes. And several other very worthwhile organizations that are performing good work, feeding people, helping others out. And it's going to be like that for as long as these films ever make money. That's my contract. I'll post it out on the Lethal Voice newsletter so you guys can take a look at it. And in fact, this concept became something that I now regularly refer to as a perpetual donation machine. And it's a tradition that continues on with all of my projects. And it really will forever. I really just like the idea. that long after I'm dead and gone, that if these films and these other projects are out there and they're making money, that it's going to be doing good for other people. It's going to help someone. And in fact, if you know good causes that you think I should check out to contribute to in the future, reach out, here or on my socials, and let me know. I'll check them out. And, this is something that I'm dedicating the rest of my life, my films, and every project to. So I'll definitely take a look at any worthwhile projects and, organizations that you guys think are important to look at. Well, just like it sounds, David Ruano and I stayed up for nearly the entire 48 hours of this 48-hour telethon that we, broadcast. David ran the whole thing from the closet of his bedroom in a house that he and his brother had just moved into. I hosted and did my part from the apartment that all of us had been sharing. And unbelievably, we pulled off the 48-hour telethon, featuring shows like the Cabin Fever Radio Music Hour, discussion shows. We were reading fairy tales to our audience at night to put them to bed. We even had our own morning shows where we drank coffee and discussed current events. I got to say, though, the Cabin Fever Radio Film Festival was really, really a lot of fun, and it felt great to let everyone in the cast and crew have the opportunity to present and even talk some about, some kind of like short film or maybe a trailer for some project of theirs, maybe just something they were really proud of. And since there were, a few of us from the Perry Mason show in the cast for Vengeance Turns now, all of us, we got together and decided that we would perform a reading of an episode of the original Perry Mason for like a very special Cabin Fever Radio novellas. I'm pretty sure that that's still out there too somewhere. And if so, I'll grab the link and I'll stick it in the description for you guys. When it was all over, I think David Ruano calculated, and we had actually kept this thing going for more like 52 hours. And we only lost our signal maybe one time during this entire thing. I think late on the second night. David fell asleep at his place. I fell asleep at mine. And both were just getting bombarded with messages from our audience and from other cast and crew telling us that we needed to, somehow fix it, that the signal had gone down. And I think by the time David caught it, it had been down maybe like 20 minutes. So 20 minutes out of over 50 hours, that's not so bad, especially for a first effort. We really felt like we pulled off something major, and at the end of it, we were just completely wiped out. However, unfortunately, it was during the telethon that I started noticing gaps between what I'd expected from our new producer and what was materializing, which really began to create strain between us on our relationship. With David and I doing all the work to build and coordinate the 48-hour telethon and getting all the casting done, it was our understanding that Dave Ross would be busy helping to build the audience for this event and for the crowdfunding efforts. Over the whole broadcast, as we interacted with our audience, though, we noticed that it seemed to be almost exclusively folks that had been invited by me or David Ruano or Kelsey or Jamal Gardner, or about anyone except Dave Ross. And I'm not saying that no one showed up because of Dave Ross, but I recognized most of the names as people that I had personally been bugging to help us. In addition, and as part of building that audience, Dave Ross was also in charge of one and only 1 hour of the programming. Dave had been doing the rounds as an up-and-coming comedian and had several friends and a lot of contacts in that world. So in my mind, like certainly in context of like everything David and I had put together, I was thinking that this would be like some kind of the Cabin Fever Radio Comedy Hour would be something like one of those amazing HBO young comedian specials that I remembered watching when I was growing up. And, places where like I got to see comedians like Sam Kinison for the first time. Instead, the hour started late, and it played as a loose, unscripted segment, not really matching the tighter format that I'd envisioned. And I just didn't feel like it landed with our viewers the way I'd hoped. I wasn't a fan. The early backers in our campaign skewed heavily toward our cast, crew, friends, family. And from what I could see, I wasn't able to link many of the backers to Dave's audience. Again, I'm not saying that there were zero backers connected to Dave Ross, just that if we had to depend on them alone, we wouldn't have been able to even pay for like one day of food for this entire cast and crew. A small alarm started going off in the back of my head. Luckily, though, I knew that the money from the crowdfunding was only supposed to be like padding, extra, added to whatever Dave Ross already had budgeted for us. And plus, we had just started the Indiegogo campaign and still had a few weeks left on it. So who knew, who knows what's going to happen at that point. And I had learned one thing from my first crowdfunding effort and like from studying many others, listening to experts. And I had scheduled our first day of shooting for Vengeance Turns to take place during this crowdfunding effort so that we could share footage with potential backers and also like really get everyone involved from our cast and crew excited about what we were creating together. From every film production story I've ever read or heard, compromise is just part of the game when making a movie. And during an indie production, particularly like ours, with close to no budget, compromise may be an understatement, as directors find themselves in an ongoing negotiation between their vision for the script that they're bringing to life versus the reality of what is actually available when it's time to shoot. I knew this going in, and that a lot of what I had been encouraged to envision while being scammed by Slick Talker. And by the way, if you're not familiar with Slick Talker and that whole deal, go check out that episode after you're done with this one. I'll drop a link in the description for you on that too. But anyway, what I had dreamt of, the film being like with a $1 million budget, that had been contained and regulated to fit within the closer to $0 budget that we were now being faced with. And I was still confident that if I scheduled things very tightly around the locations that Dave Ross had access to, and we went in tightly rehearsed, that we would still deliver a quality movie that told the story we wanted to tell, regardless of the budget. Compromise was part of my DNA as a producer and director for Vengeance Turns. But there is a limit. I think we can all agree on that. When we first arrived at the location to shoot our cold open, which would then quickly be added to our crowdfunding efforts to pad the budget, I was impressed by the surrounding nature of this property we had access to near Lake Elsinore. It's a nice like cabin type house, and it belonged to one of Dave Ross's friends. David Ruano was walking around the property, scouting the little pockets of nature around it for good places that he could set up the camera and get some of the shots. And he was especially focused on the opening shots of the movie, which I think are amazingly beautiful, by the way. But as we turn from this wooded area at the beginning where the bad guys come from later to the innocent family that meets their doom, it's just this really, really beautiful little nature area. While David was doing that, I was walking around the cabin itself, looking for everything, anything that might be out of place for the 1870s. And I noticed that the whole inside of this place was likely visible through the windows, and you could see shelves with books on them, light fixtures hanging down, and just lots of like little knickknacks and stuff outside, along with a modern type of door behind this screen door, which was awesome. And it actually worked perfectly. So I started telling David Ruano and Dave Ross what stuff needed moved, what screens needed to come off the windows. And when suddenly the homeowner calls Dave Ross over to talk for a second, David Ruano and I, we just continued moving knickknacks and anything else that wouldn't belong and assumed we would grab tools to start working on the rest. But remember there being a line when compromising? Well, Dave Ross came walking back up to us and said that his friend had overheard me saying that we were removing screens and whole doors and stuff like that. But then he told Dave he didn't know that we were going to be doing all that, and he wasn't crazy about it. He basically straight up said he didn't want us to do it. Although I was already starting to feel my blood pressure rising just because I didn't feel as if Dave had clearly coordinated with this person, that didn't change that we needed the location, and we needed it to reflect an era of about 150 years in the past. So with every bit of calmness that I could muster, I quietly told Dave to go explain to his friend what we were shooting and what we needed. And for the first of many times during this shoot, I found myself cautioning that we needed to get started because we were racing the sun and would really soon lose our light. And I definitely did not imagine getting permission to return for a second day of shooting, especially now. While he walked over and explained our situation to his friend, other actors started showing up, and I discovered that our youngest actor, the son of Kate Comstock, had no wardrobe at all. Not at our location, not back at the apartment, nowhere. And luckily, we had already gotten like some Western dresses and stuff for our female actors. We understood that we wouldn't have access to the other stuff until we were doing, principal photography on these other locations that Dave had set up for us. But here, right now, for this young male actor, we had nothing, and he is absolutely central to this opening scene. David Ruano, who had known me for several years and had even been a roommate for a while by this point, noticed that my face was just like already turning red behind my COVID mask as my anger was intensifying. And he looked concerned and ended up like standing close to me and Dave Ross as he walked back over to inform us of what the homeowners had decided about our needs. Luckily, Dave let us know that his friend had said that although he wasn't crazy about it, we could take the screens off the windows. We could move things a little, around inside and make them less visible for the shots we needed. And we could even take the door off the hinges as long as we promised, to put everything back before we left. And of course, that compromise seemed more than fair to me. But I asked Dave where the wardrobe was for our young actor, and he awkwardly revealed that there was nothing. I started asking about stores, and I found out that the closest was about 30 minutes away, which means an hour and a half minimum by the time you count finding the right pants, purchasing them, everything, and getting back. So we started thinking about other people that we knew, who could maybe go pick them up and run them over to us. But since we were out in the middle of nowhere at Lake Elsinore and all our friends were back in LA, that would have taken even longer for anybody to come help us. As I'm contemplating just a variety of solutions, Dave Ross walked away trying to come up with an answer of his own. And literally every person there starts pitching suggestions. While David Ruano and I discussed our options, Dave Ross infamously walks up to us holding a gray pillowcase. A pillowcase. And asked us if there was any way we could use this pillowcase. And I swear to God, I started seeing stars like someone had punched me. And I thought I might actually pass out, simply from the sudden and like rapid rise in my anger about the situation. There are compromises, but a pillowcase. At some point during those last few minutes of everybody like panicking, Jess B, who acted in the movie and also acted as a producer and huge, just all around help, had already jumped in her car without really telling anyone. And she was already part of the way into that half-hour drive to get the clothes from the local store. She texted and let us know and said that she could definitely get back before we lost the light. So if we had everything else set up, we should be able to start as soon as she got back. I'll never know how she made it back so fast, but her whole round trip, including the purchase, was less than an hour. And then as soon as she was back, Kate was grabbing the pants, getting them onto her son so that they could like literally tailor them. They were cutting them off right there on the spot. And although I would rather the whole thing have never happened, it was just amazing to watch everyone coming together like this and just operate like a machine and making sure that we didn't miss our light. We not only got the light we needed, we got the shots we wanted. And like I said before, David Ruano really shot something outstanding for those first opening scenes. I would love that whole opening sequence, even if I hadn't been the one to make this movie. To shoot the violence at the end of that sequence, we put some huge like spotlights, like floodlights behind us inside the house. And then I showed Jamal and like Dave's friend how to move in these big, very exaggerated motions in front of them that cast these huge shadows. And that really just sells the brutal acts that we're committing. And then all I needed to do is go back and post and add in all the terrible sounds of a family being slaughtered. After a very long and very stressful day, which didn't end until we had put the doors back on the hinges and the screens and everything else back in place, after the actors and the crew and everybody else had already gone home, I felt exhausted, but satisfied, fulfilled, and as happy as I had felt since before the whole pandemic had locked everything down. I just couldn't wait to get home, take a shower, crash, and then maybe get up the next day to, discuss editing some of this footage with David Ruano and then add it to the Indiegogo, show it on social media, see if we could get people interested. When I arrived home, though, the door was unexpectedly locked in a way it shouldn't have been. Kelsey Jaffer was staying with us, and she had just flown in from Chicago that very same day. And I had really tried to be clear that you only lock the handle and you don't lock the deadbolt because the key doesn't work in the deadbolt. But when I got home, both were locked. I was locked out. Nobody's getting in. So I knocked. I knocked a few times. I just waited patiently, just wanted to get inside. I just wanted to be let into my own home. So while I stood there so exhausted that it took an effort, just to have made it up the stairs, I just wanted to go to bed. So I knocked again, louder, but still no answer. My exhaustion was now combining with just feeling deflated as I stood there locked out of my own place. So I decided to text her, please let me in. I sent a brief text letting her know I was outside, I got no response. I sent another. Still no response. I really didn't know what to do at this point. So I called David Ruano, who was actually on the lease for the apartment, to see if there was like some secret way I could get in. And sure enough, there was. But I would have to go up the other stairs to the metal door that leads to the patio and then come in through the sliding door, which was never locked because we couldn't lock it. And since this metal door was locked too and there was no key for it, I was actually going to need to take this one off its hinges too. Yay, my second in, one day. But for this one, I didn't have any tools or anyone to help me. I stood there and I turned those bolts with my fingers for over a half hour until my fingers were, no kidding, my fingers were bloody and raw. But I got those bolts out. I got the door off its hinges and I made it inside the apartment. After I made it inside, Kelsey walked out of what had been David's room in the past, but was now like the guest accommodations that while our actors needed it. I asked her why she had locked me out and not answered the door. And she told me that she had gone out earlier and gotten some food, eaten it, and felt kind of ill, sick from the food she ate, and decided to lay down. And since she was a little afraid of our neighborhood, she also decided to lock the door, and she locked the deadbolt. And then she said that she had heard me knocking, but she had no idea what all that noise was or where it was coming from. And then she only saw my texts after I had broken in, and that's when she came out. So with my fingers raw and bleeding, my mind raw and screaming, and my emotions just raw, I told her I needed to go take a shower and that we would talk about all this stuff the next day, that I really just needed some rest more than anything right at that moment. You see, Kelsey and I had already been having some problems leading up to her arrival in Los Angeles from Chicago. In fact, I had even told her that she should not make the trip from Chicago and that I would find someone else to play Delicate Poison. But deals had been made behind my back that had led to her choosing to continue with the original plan, come to LA, and stay with the production that she'd been a part of since the beginning. It was a decision that led to a snowball of ill will just rolling downhill for the rest of the shoot. And that led to the complete and total end of Kelsey and my friendship, as well as any desire for us to collaborate ever again. But I have really gone on way too long already tonight. So you'll have to hear about all of mine and Kelsey's problems and how it all started, how things began to escalate, and much more on the next episode of the Lethal Voice podcast. It's an episode I call HQ and the Green Screen Room. Make sure you're here, and you'll actually even hear from Dave Ross himself. Thank you so much for joining me tonight, especially if you stuck around through this extra long, extra dramatic episode. I truly appreciate each and every one of you out there listening to these stories of how I made Vengeance Turns Volume 1 and Volume 2, which, if you still haven't seen them, by the way, they're available to watch for free on Tubi right now. Look for the links in the description. So, anyway, thanks again, Lethal Ones. That's it for me tonight. So until next time, have faith in your need to compromise. But please also have faith that there is a line. See you next time on the Lethal Voice podcast.